So now that we have learned about the cognitive aspect of the self, and that is self-concept, we will proceed with understanding the affective aspect of the self or the feeling self, which is the self-esteem. So somehow I am trying to categorize each term because this is again social psychology, and in particular, I also personally find it very easy for you and for everyone to somehow understand each terms if you're going to categorize them into the understanding in the perspective of social psychology, like how self-concept is more cognitive and how self-esteem is more effective in its feature. So now let's start with understanding self-esteem. Self-esteem, by the way, in social psychology, it refers to the positive or negative feelings that we have about ourselves. So if we have positive self-esteem, that means we have high self-esteem. If we have negative self-esteem, that means we have low self-esteem. Or in layman's term, we have high confidence or low confidence. Why does we have to study self-esteem and why it is important? For one, I believe that although the self is particularly determined by our thoughts about ourselves, which is our self-concept, we are also a product of our emotions, right? And this is the aspect of self-esteem. And in fact, we all want to feel positively good about ourselves, and we work hard to be able to do so and having this high self-esteem or high confidence. And in addition to that, our self-esteem is determined by many factors too, including how well we view our own personal performance, our own appearance, or how satisfied we are in our relationships with other people, with our friends, and our family, with our lovers. No, self-esteem is then part of a trait that is stable over time in us. No, and such that some people have relatively because of that, no, some people have relatively high self-esteem and others have lower self-esteem or low self-confidence. And even if it is stable over time, our self-esteem is also a state, no, that varies from day to day or even hours to days to weeks. So when we have succeeded an important task and we do something that we find importante gito nga task, no? We feel proud about ourselves, diba? We feel good and that added to our self-esteem, no? And that adds to our positive feelings, emotions, and thoughts about ourselves. And the same goes when we experience failure in life, or embarrassment in life, we feel that we are being ignored or criticized, no, that could also affect our self-concept, atong pag-ila sa atong kagalingon, certainly because it appears that it affects our emotions or affect about ourselves. So if you remember, how we think affects how we feel, and how we feel also affects the way we think, right? So that is self-concept. Nonetheless, moving forward, self-esteem can also be measured using implicit measures and explicit measures. So when we speak of explicit measures, it is about explicit obvious. Implicit, dili obvious nga measures. So if you remember, self-measures and self-report and behavioral measures, mura ni siya ginani. So explicit measures, kanang obvious nga measure, like example, do you believe that you are proud of yourself, or do you believe that you are self-confident? So obvious kay mga pungtana mo na ang explicit measures. So there are actually psychological tests that have explicit measures to measure self-esteem. There's also other psychological tests that measure self-esteem in a very implicit way. For example, like complete the sentence. Like, I believe I am. Kana. So, I believe I am. So, sila mo puno. And unsay lang gisuwat dira could actually mean an implicit, no, not obvious measures about how they view themselves. Because, example, I believe I am attractive. No? So, that could mean, nindot yung pananaw sa inyong kagalingon. I believe I am an attractive, no? So but low ang iyang pananaw niya sa iyang kaugalingon. So these are somehow explicit measures because these questions in the psychological test does not necessarily imply about self-esteem. Ikaw ang mupuno mo ang explicit, no, dili obvious. And there's also another term that we call implicit egoism. Unsa man ni? This is actually the idea in certain measures or psychological tests. Now, we tend to prefer, no, certain ideas, certain people, certain places, certain things that resembles like us, no? Like we tend to choose those people na pari-parihan nato, mas similar nato, or we tend to choose naturally those things that actually gravitate of what who we are or what somehow tends to be more like us. So that's the reason uh, when uh, when answering psychological test, if it's an implicit measure, if imong gipang ansiran dito kay mao to imuhang prefer, no? Kabantay mana, kindly check the box for your preference, which you would likely more likely be. So mo na atong gitawag nga implicit egoism rather, and how you tend to naturally prefer things over other things because it resembles who you are. So that is just how psychology, or in particular social psychology, try to measure self-esteem. And this time around, let's try to dig deeper about what is self-esteem in general or in particular. So although self-esteem comes in part of our personal accomplishments, it is also influenced by social situation. So like positive self-esteem occurs not only when we do well in our own eyes, which is very self-concerned, no? Like how we do well with ourselves, accomplishing, doing tasks that would add up to our self-esteem, that is very self-concerned. Self-esteem could also be there could also be rather another route for self-esteem, and that is other concern. And that is through social situation, or when we feel we are positively perceived by other people we care about. And how does this go? This is also through social status, which is very other concern type that would add to our self-esteem. That would actually pave the way for us to have higher self-esteem or lower self-esteem. So social status refers to the extent to which we are viewed positively and are esteemed by others. So this is another route of self-esteem. When we are viewed by others as positively, we are in a high social status. When we're perceived by others negatively, we can be in a lower social status, which could affect our self-esteem, right? Because when other people, our peers, view us like, maayo ba ni siya, or kana siya, banggiitan ba ini siya, di ba? You feel proud about yourself, or you are very good at this. But if other people view you, like in social status, very low, like what you see in movies, like they bully this certain people because they are like this, no? They are the like outcast in social situation. Di ba kasagaran anak nilang mga ginabully, gina-outcast tend to portray low self-esteem. So that is how social status could also affect self-esteem. Not just that, how social status is actually being achieved man di ay. And that is through self-presentation, or simply the tendency of us to present a positive self-image to others with the goal of increasing our social status, which is very other concern. And if you remember the public self-consciousness, could also be related to self-esteem. Because public self-consciousness is other concern, and if we are public conscious, we know what ticks the public, we know what is trending in the public, and we want to present. This is self-presentation part, which is effective part. We want to present ourselves in that manner too. For what reason? We want to be connected, we want to belong, or we want to be viewed positively by other people. So in this image, example in here, no? You can see that there's a difference in social status. So usually if we want to present ourselves positively, we tend to present ourselves, we dress well, we want to appear well because we want to look like in a high social status. But if we don't dress well, we don't somehow disregard about our look, our appearance, now it could also affect how people view us in terms of our social status. So how does this too actually affects our self-esteem? This is actually more like the process of it. So we actually tend to use our self-presentation to try to convince others that we are good and worthy people. So when we are successful with our self-presentation, other people view us positively, and that means we have high social status. When we are perceived that we have high social status, we experience positive we experience positive self-esteem. The same manner as well with the negative self-esteem. When we present ourselves in a very somehow not in what other people would somehow see as something good, as somehow trendy, or not somehow as other people believe as the norm of a certain group, other people might view you negatively in such a way that you will have a low social status. And because of that, other people don't like to get involved with you, and that means you have low self-esteem, like what you see in usually in movies, like the nerds, no, the weirdos, no, they are viewed negatively, and because how they present ourselves, because how they present themselves is also something that it's not quite accepted in the social situation. And because of that, their social status is quite low, which affects their self-esteem. So these are some of the factors of how our self-esteem is being affected by social situations. So speaking of self-presentation, Edward Jones and Thane Pittman, this is actually a 1982 study, described 5 self-presentation strategies, each of which is expected to create a resulting emotion in another person. So for example, if you want to appear to be likable, you should go or you should do the psychological technique of ingratiation. No, it is a goal of which you tend to be liked by others by using your flattery or charm, di ba? Lo man ko kanang kuan kanang feeling close lagi kay ka friend, no? Kanang you're very good, no? You're using your charm not to be liked by others. So that is another form of self-presentation. In some way, uh if you want to present yourself and to appear as being feared by other people, you tend to intimidate other people, and that means you can show being aggressive, no? So other people tend to see you as quite intimidating for them to create fear. In other ways as well, if you want to be viewed as somehow being the better person, you tend to exemplify, no, by using guilt, and that means other people might feel they are less than you, no? And other people also try to use the tactic of self-presentation by being viewed as helpless or needy. So they usually tend to supplicate, no, makita nato sa mga kalsada, no, nga nangayo, magbeg, no? What is the self-representation they are using? That is the self-representation of supplication. That is to create pity. And there's also other uh the last or the fifth form of self-presentation that usually most people also do, and that is self-promotion. This is to create respect by persuading others that you are competent, no, by presenting what are you good at, no. So these could be at least the common ways in which people present themselves, either being liked, tend to be feared of, tend to be somehow showing they're better than others, tend to be seen as being needy, and tend to be seen as or tend to be viewed as somehow to be respected. So now we know that self-presentation affects our social status, but social status could be changing, right? And very fluid over time and year. So how do we regulate our self-presentation? And that refers to our self-monitoring. And that is the tendency to be both motivated and capable of regulating our behavior to meet the demands of social situation. Because sometimes what requires in social situation may be a different thing. Like in this specific situation in the family, you will be presenting yourself in a different aspect. Now, if you're in church, diba, you should be presenting yourself as a very good, respectable. If you are with your friends, you will be presenting yourself as very jamming, approachable. If you are in school, you're presenting yourself, could be very studious, very diligent, no? So sila lain nga social setting, lain di ay ang ato ang self-presentation. And how do we make sure that we are uh, regulating this kind of behavior in different social situation? And that is through our self-monitoring. So constantly we are monitoring kung asa na ta. Diba? Because other people might find lost, no? And like, maana sa okay ra ka? Okay, may boom sila ba nga, you're in church but you're somehow showing the behavior you tend to to be like with your friends, no? Or nakas mong friends and then somehow you're showing it the behavior you tend to be like with when you are in church or when you are in your neighbor or your friends or in your family. So we tend to always self-monitor, making sure that whatever is in the social situation, we meet that demand. And don't you know that according to research, high self-monitorers or high self-monitors people are particularly good at reading the emotions of others and therefore are better at fitting into social situation, no? For for a very particular reason, no, that they are very quite naturally gifted in understanding what needs to be done and how they should act and or behave in that current situation. So importante din nga life skill ang mag self-monitor ka kay ngano man basig naa ka serious kay ang kuan ba serious kay ang ang storya ba no kay naay namatin kalit kag katawa makibaw ka na kuan ba to si kuan no katawa lang kag kalit meaning you did not monitor yourself no kay that is an inappropriate response to the social situation. For example, kana ay kinahanglan og tabang unya imong gikatawan, di ba? Meaning people will view you negatively unsa man ni siya oy and that would affect your self presentation. So dapat mo monitor gyud ka permis imong self, di ba? So example gud pareha gud anang naa kay crush nimo, you tend to somehow don't you know that when girls are in their naa sila sa women are makasugot nila ilang crush, they tend their voice to be somehow quite high pitch. Mo high pitch daw kuno ang mga voice sa mga women if na sila makita nila ilang crush, no? Kay this is somehow uh this is a very kanang automatic response of women ba. And to be viewed as somehow charming, no? 'Di ba? Kay feminine ba nang murag high pitch ka, 'di ba? So somehow viewed as what they say evolutionary technique, no? Or defense mechanism na women tend to show high pitch in voice when they are the people they find attractive. No, so more flirting ba, no? So this is self-monitoring. Mabitang self-conscious kita if na atong crush, no? Because we want to monitor ourselves indicating that we are presentable and our crush will view us as kanang nindot, no, as kanang ideal, as attractive. And this goes as well with boys, no, when they have crushes, so they tend to look good, they brush their hair a lot, no, making sure that they look presentable. So that is the importance of monitoring and how it enables us to present ourselves in any social situation that could affect our social status, which later on could have an impact on our self esteem. So now that we have talked about how self-esteem is being impacted by self-presentation and social status, I'll just be clear about you that self-esteem is not a cause of outcomes. Although self-esteem, they say most of the research that those people who have high self-esteem tend to achieve more and be successful more in life, it is not the cause of outcomes overall. No, it is not certainly the factor because so much more I believe self-esteem is a perception more than it being a reality. So technically, self-esteem is how we feel about ourselves. That could be an underlying reason why people tend to be more motivated to accomplish certain things that could affect certain outcomes in their life, but not necessarily the cause of outcomes. So ako lang ng klarohon because I don't want you to correlate that high self-esteem is always the reason why people achieve more, while people tend to be more successful. Because sometimes having only self-esteem is not enough, di ba? We also have to work. We also have to act because feeling good isn't enough for us to have a good life, di ba? Feel good lang, positive lang ta pero may, no? It's like optimism. Optimism is being hopeful and effective at the same time. So it's not enough to just have self esteem, but we also have to do the work. So that's why self esteem is not a cost of all outcomes, but could be an underlying reason of any positive consequences that we may be having in our life. However, when we promote ourselves too much, grabe kitag bilib sa tong kagalingon ba? Although we may feel good about ourselves in a short term, it actually has a longer effect, especially when we create uh, and maintains self-esteem that is not very accurate. So that's why when we want to build our self-esteem, we should be building it in a more accurate self-perspective. And this is what we call the accurate self-view. Those people that actually tend to have an uh, over self-esteem, or what we call over self-confidence, could actually be called in other term as narcissism. This is actually a personality trait that characterized by overly high self-esteem, self-admiration, and self-centeredness, and this could be detrimental for our part of ourself and understanding ourselves. Why? For certain reason that it is built in the inaccurate view. So, meaning we overestimate our ability and we believe that we are so good that we tend to somehow disregard other people and just believe na ato-ato lang, kita rang gid kaya gid nato, ano gid pwede, no laing ikaw ra gid, you're the only one. Kana, and that could be a very dangerous belief. Okay? Aside from that, it could limit our self-enhancement. Ano man, di na tagahan mo improve. Okay? Parang mo, ikaw na maging the best, di ba? And dili na ka mo grow as a person because you have this inaccurate view of yourself, and that could somehow be as a negative aspect. So narcissism is somehow statements nga they usually say, no, like I know I am good because everybody tell keeps telling me so, no, or I can usually talk my way out of anything, no, or I can be the center of attention for everyone, or I am a natural talent for influencing people, no, I know everything, no? Ana ba? And don't you know that people do not normally like narcissist people because they are unrealistic and they think only of themselves. So narcissists make bad romantic partners as well because they are actually they behave selfishly and are always ready to look for someone else who think will be better mate. So if they find a better options, they will go for it. So they tend to be more likely unfaithful. Don't you know that? So narcissists may also be would be obnoxious, so continually interrupting and bullying others because they feel that they are good. So overly inaccurate view of self-esteem could be viewed negatively by other people. So dapat sakto ato ang view sa atong self. So we have this term self-verifying feedback. And what do we mean by this? Is actually a social psychological theory, a self-verification theory, and part of that theory is this term, no, self-verifying feedback, wherein how people wants other to see them as they see themselves, and will take active steps in ensuring that others perceive them in ways that confirms their stable self beliefs. So ang mga narcissist manggod, no, they think of themselves high, but other people think otherwise. So we want to have an accurate view of ourselves. We have to continuously self-verify if what we are doing is in line with what other people think of us. So this is the process of self-verification, and we need that. So it's like a personality check. Ba? It's understanding na sometimes, we hate toxic people, but sometimes you have to understand basin kita di ang toxic people, no, basin in certain situation we become to be the toxic ones, and we always tell other people nga, I don't like toxic people, I don't like my past relationship because of this and that, and they always run down to the same thing, and we have to assess basin di ay, it's also a both blames to share, and we also have part of it di ay. And there is nothing wrong about admitting. For sure, you remember the process of authenticity and opening up because we need that in our self development. And it is the understanding that we are constantly growing. And if we want to enhance ourselves, we have to let go with our narcissistic perspective. Now we are good and better off alone in ourselves. So this is the importance of self-esteem as the effective component of ourself. So now that we have learned the cognitive aspect of the self, and that is the self concept, and the affective aspect of the self or self esteem, in this particular slide, we will consider in more detail the social aspect of the self, and that is the role of social situation in determining our self concept and self esteem or our self. in general. So for sure, you know that the self has meaning only within the social context in the field of social psychology. And it is not wrong to say that social situation defines our self-concept and self-esteem. Because at some point we rely to others to provide us with social reality, and that means to help us determine what to think, feel, and do in any social situation. Therefore, social situation is really necessary for us to build our how we act, how we feel, and how we should build ourselves in any demand in social settings. So to start with, in understanding our social self, now from time to time, we always tend to compare ourselves, in certain situations, and that is what we call social comparison. It occurs when we learn about our abilities and skills, about the appropriateness and validity of our opinions, and about our relative social status by comparing our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of those around us. So self-comparison is necessary sa atuang self-concept o self-esteem kay dira man ta makagain og social reality or social knowledge, right? That I have to do better the I on this aspect, or hala, I'm already good na di on this aspect, so la ka nang naaday ko ko ana ka nang nakita na ako kung nga improve na di ay ko, no? So nakita nimo ba kung asa na ka, somehow you use that as a leverage for you or as a meter for you to know na kanang where is your position at the I in the social situation. So kana siya. Aside from that, we also use social comparison to evaluate ourselves, 'di ba? Like, unsa man ka kana kinahanglan pa ka mobuhat ani, or basig nabiyaan na ka, or basig gauna na ka, so mutabang na lang ka sa uban nga nanginahanglan. So that is the purpose of social comparison and how it forms actually our self concept or in self-esteem. So there are actually two ways, roughly, of social comparison, and we have this downward social comparison and upward social comparison. Let's start first with the downward social comparison. This is very self-explanatory. We compare ourselves, or we attempt to compare ourselves in the image of comparing those who we feel are worse off than we are. So downward, no, katong mga downward social comparison, katong mga mas kanang kuan pa nato, no, kanang ubos pa nato, no, downward. Ang upward social comparison is the opposite of the downward. So it is somehow comparing ourselves who we think are better off than we are. So ngano importante man ni ang downward ug upward comparison. Kay naa niya siya advantages and napon niya siya disadvantages. So if you see in this image in here, let's start first with the negative one, no? If you use downward social comparison, you would tend to, it would actually tend to add your self-esteem, no? Hala, maayo man di ay ko, na may uban mas worst pa na ko, oh. But if you use it negatively, you actually tend to look down other people. Diba? Like, it's just, mas kuan pa ko nimo. Mas gwapa pa ko. Anak ka. And nindot man na siya if you are viewing it in a funny and a joking way, ikaw lang nakahibaw, no? Pero kung you were saying it with other people may misunderstood you and have a negative self-presentation of you. And if you're doing it in a very boastful way, it could also be a negative downward social comparison because you tend to look down other people based on their physical appearance, diba? If you use upward social comparison in a negative way, no, it could actually make you feel less of yourself. Ano man, if imo i-compare sa imong kaugat, imo i-compare imong chapter 1, no, sa chapter 15 sa other person, you would feel, hala, kalayo pa na ako. Basig, kung anggid ko, no, kanang di ko kamao, no, basig, kanang di gini para ako, no, and you are still starting. So, if you use upward social comparison in negative way, it makes you think less and feel less about yourself. But if we use downward social comparison and upward social comparison in a positive way, it could actually motivate you. Like in this image here, no? Naatay dako nga fish, naatay gamay nga fish. Even if gamay siya nga fish, ang iyahang environment na siya pebbles nga blue, na siya plan. Dako tuod siya nga fish, no, pero blank kaayo ang iyahang ang iyahang surroundings. And this tells us that in every situation we are, there are really people that we are better off than them, and there are also people that are worse than us. And this makes us, and this is actually this lesson about social comparison in particular, is like a humbling experience in using properly this comparison, because when we positively look, or I mean, when we positively look and do downward social comparison, it makes us know nga na-improve dai ko. No, looking other people nga sa imong stage, no, gikap kuan ba ako na no, nag-struggle sa ko tong first year ko. Pero karon second year na ko, nakaya mo dai na ko. No, downward social comparison, nakaya nimo. It makes you feel better about yourselves, 'di ba? Nakaya di ay nimo. You did not tend to look down those people, but rather you help them because you experience what they have experienced in the past, no? And there's also another way of possibly doing upward social comparison. So nasa na siya positive way. When you compare yourself with those people that you look up to, it makes you feel motivated. No, I want to be like them. In the future, I will be a psychologist. In the future, I want to be a millionaire. I want to become like that. And it is like a motivating factor for you to do more in life. So that is like the positive aspect of social comparison. So like in this image here, there is a positive thing sa usa ka fish na positive things sa usa ka fish dako man siya no na kanigamay pero nindot ang environment. So in everything we do, naagid tayo mga nagi better than us, naapoy worse than us. And we have to know that we have to continually improve ourselves and properly use the downward and upward social comparison. So that's it for this specific presentation. Now we proceed to the next one. Still another way that we use other people to actually create a positive self-esteem for ourselves, and that is through our social network, being affiliated or be part of a group membership. And it actually makes us feel important and valued in certain groups and makes us feel good about ourselves. And that is the importance of social identity. So when we speak of social identity, it's actually how we refer to positive emotions that we experience as a member of an important group. And we can gain our social identity if we in church, in school, in local community, di ba? Or in your organizations or anything that you're involved with. Know that is creating a positive impact about who you are, about yourself. So important can you see because your social identity is also could be an important aspect as well in understanding how you should relate well with other people. And if you relate well with other people, you have a very good social identity, you also gain a social network or social support, which we have discussed that is very important in buffering negative emotions that somehow we experience. So in that result, if social support buffer negative emotions, so technically it could boost our self-esteem because self-esteem is the effective part of ourself. So aside from social identity, we can sometimes also enhance our self-esteem by basking in the reflected glory of others. And that is through our in-groups or other people that we know. And we call this as burging or basking process. No? Burging or basking in the reflected glory, that is B-I-R-G. I-N-G is a gerund, right? Like what you are doing. So basking in the reflected glory or the process of that could actually enhance our self-esteem. Like for example, no, we won, no, like the school won certain things, so that's why we post, no, in Facebook, no, CITU tops again because the pride of CITU is also our personal pride, and it gives us this esteem, self-esteem, na it's a collective part no of us because we are part of that, diba? So it could also enhance our self-esteem, and that is what we call basking in the reflected glory or basking in the glory of others. So for example, in this one, no, ni-post siya about the Miss Universe. This was way back in 2018. Maganap sa Miss Universe only in the Philippines. Congrats, Catriona. Share if you're a proud Pinoy, no? Dili good kita ang nakuan, good di good siya ang nadaog. Good di pa kita ang nadaog sa Miss Universe. Si Catriona bigid ang nadaog. Pero since Catriona was representing the Philippines, we feel as a social identity nga Pinoy ta, we bask in the glory or in the reflected glory of Catriona to make us also feel proud about being a Filipino. And it actually increases our self-esteem, no? The Filipino is seen as very competitive internationally, diba? So that is Burgeoning, no? We do that. Another example for that as well the is when our friend are doing something good. Mano ito, oy, ako binang kuan, ako binang friend, no? Or ako binang igagaw, no? Kay we feel nga unsa iyang pride of kay we also share it, no? And the opposite of basking in the reflected glory of others is what we call is core thing, no, or cutting off reflected failure. It's actually a tendency to be trying not to associate people wherein we think that could affect our reputation, no? So we tend to dissociate ourselves with lower status, no, because we know that social status is important. So we tend to disassociate other people with lower status individual that might affect our reputation, about how other people view us. So we tend to be corfing or cutting off reflected failure because we don't want to be associated with people who are considered failures. So kana parihaan na namatay mangin ana mayon ta ay kuana na ninyo ay kay dili ko kailan nimo or wa ko kailan nimo di ta friend ana ba ana tano kay kitay mauwaw para niya diba labi na diri sa culture sa Philippines, so we have this other concern type of affect, no? Kapwa, we have shared identity. Or in a simpler term, core thing is like disowning, no? Like you disown someone because you don't want to be associated with them. No? So that is core thing. So it actually affects our how we interact with other people and either adds to our self-esteem or lowers our self-esteem. So speaking further about our social self, in the Filipino setting, kapwa is the core of Filipino social psychology. For sure you've heard about Filipino psychology, but Filipino psychology is in itself a social psychology. So kapwa, according to Enriquez, it means a sense of togetherness or connectedness to each other, which I have discussed to you from the previous presentation. Kapwa in English also means we, so that's why it is shared. And kapwa has two categories, hindi ibang tao or outsider, and hindi ibang tao or one of us. It doesn't mean that if ikaw ay ibang tao, you are bad, no? Hindi ka ibang tao, you are okay. But hindi ibang tao and ibang tao are just a level of communication and interactions that we do. Because if the person is ibang tao, we tend to communicate with a person in a very superficial level. Like we accommodate, we're hospitable, we tend to connect, no? But if it is hindi ibang tao, if it's already one of us, we tend to communicate in a level that is quite intimate, quite close, no? And that is how we form our social identity because in our core Filipino psychology, we believe that we are we have this shared identity, and from uh, it is strengthening this identity that we have, and knowing the layers and levels of communications that we usually engage in any social situation. So that is just a general overview of the Filipino social psychology. You have reached the end of this slide. If ever you have questions, please do let me know. Thank you for listening.